Imagine for a moment, if you will, the United States in the present day. Imagine a bill reaches the U.S. House of Representatives called America, the nation-state of white people. In its basic principles, it states, the right to exercise national self-determination in the United States is unique to white people. Further down, a clause for white settlement. The state views the development of white settlement as a national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation. Outraged, a coalition led by the Congressional Black Caucus initiates a challenge to the bill and proposes a bill of their own, where it calls the United States a country for all its citizens. But the Speaker of the House unilaterally disqualifies the bill before it's allowed to even be debated. Why? The House General Counsel explains in a statement, the bill includes several articles that are meant to alter the character of the United States from the nation-state of white people to a state in which there is equal status from the point of view of nationality for whites and people of color. The bill is dead. America, the nation-state of white people, passes through both chambers of Congress unchallenged. It's then signed into law. U.S. President Joe Biden would invoke the law in a tweet a year later, saying, America is not a state of all its citizens. According to the nation-state law we passed, America is the nation-state of white people, and not anyone else. As one rights group put it, there is no democratic constitution in the world that designates the constitutional identity of the state on racial grounds, as serving one ethnic group. There is now. This disconcerting scenario is anything but. It's completely real, and happened just a few years ago to little coverage and little condemnation. You've probably heard the phrase, Israel is an apartheid state, but what does that really mean? Apartheid is an Afrikaans word, meaning apartness. It was the name of a policy of racial discrimination and separation in South Africa, which lasted from the late 1940s into the 1990s. South Africa's apartheid government was roundly condemned by the international community, and as a result, a long series of conventions and statutes led to its firm prohibition under international law. In fact, the UN General Assembly has condemned it as a crime against humanity since as far back as 1968. In 1973, the General Assembly adopted the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. The high contracting parties to the Geneva Conventions designated apartheid a grave breach, a protocol which went into effect in 1979, and the Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court, outlawed it as well. Indeed, apartheid is an extraordinary crime, in the same category as slavery and genocide. In fact, the 1973 convention uses language straight from the Genocide Convention. The various conventions and statutes differ in their language, but the areas in which they overlap include the following. There exists an institutionalized regime of systematic racial oppression and discrimination. The regime was established with the intent to maintain the domination of one racial group over another, and the regime features inhumane and inhuman acts committed as an integral part of the regime. Virtue-signaling left-wing liberal rags like The Atlantic and the New York Times lecture us on racism in America, but when covering Israel, absolutely zero mention of not the plight of the Palestinians in the occupied territories, but within Israel proper. A common retort to the charge of apartheid in Israel is that 20% of Israel's population is Palestinian.
The worst lie is this. Israel is an apartheid state.
These are citizens of Israel who can vote in elections.
And even are represented in all branches of Israeli government.
They can hold public office. They enjoy all the freedoms of their Jewish counterparts. Israel, therefore, is not an apartheid state. Setting aside what should be a glaring omission, that is the occupied Palestinian territories, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank including East Jerusalem, millions of people that are suspiciously left out. I wonder why. No, for a moment, let's discuss these slightly less than 2 million Palestinian Arabs who live in Israel proper. Israel is unique in the world for its sophisticated information apparatus. And with its IDF spokesperson's unit, Israel is able to write word for word much of the script that Western news outlets read from. It can be hard to know what is fact and what is fiction. By using Ground News, my go-to media tool, I can compare headlines and get additional context the mainstream media doesn't provide. This app and website combines thousands of sources from around the world and shows things like political bias, factuality, and source ownership. Of course, I've been following updates on Israel and Palestine, and this story piqued my attention. Israel's encirclement of Gaza City tightens as top U.S. diplomat arrives to push for humanitarian aid. On the website, we see that over 150 sources have covered it, and it's pretty evenly covered by the right and center. Looking closer, the Times of Israel, a left-leaning source based in Jerusalem, focuses on drones finding hostages held by Hamas. On the right, I even noticed articles from Russian state-owned media. I think what Ground News is doing is really important, and I encourage you to check it out. Go to ground.news/GDF. Subscribe through my link for as little as $1 a month or 40% off unlimited access, and support my channel in the meantime. The story begins in 1948. 750,000 Arabs have vanished from what is now the State of Israel. Some say they were forced out. Some say they left on their own. Many say it was a mixture of both. Maybe for argument's sake, I'll grant that every single Palestinian left on their own.
Roughly 90% of the population was expelled.
With all of these Palestinians now gone, the State of Israel begins a campaign of systematic destruction of Palestinian homes through demolition and forestation, the planting of trees in villages, making them uninhabitable. In 2019, Haaretz reported on the practice using declassified Israeli documents. Whether the Palestinians were forced out or left on their own, no matter, the destruction of homes ensured that they had no place to come back to, which under international law is still forced displacement. One example is representative of the broader trend. In 1948, the Israeli military ordered the northern village of Ikrit, with a population of 600, to leave temporarily.
This is a temporary measure.
They didn't actually cross the border, but relocated just several kilometers away. But they were never allowed to return. The residents sued for the right to return, and actually won. Israel's Supreme Court ruled in their favor. However, the Israeli Ministry of Defense refused to implement the decision, fearing it would create a precedent. In 1951, the Ministry of Defense blew up all the remaining houses in the village. To this day, the Ikrit community numbers 1,500, who live just 20 kilometers away in Ramah. And to this day, they continue to fight for their right to return to their homes. In 1950, the State of Israel passed the Absentees Property Law, which the state used to claim all the land of all the Palestinians who had fled their homes as a result of the war, regardless of whether they fled to another country or were internally displaced. And to this day, they are still prohibited from accessing and using land and property that belonged to them or their families in 1948. From 1948 to 1966, the first 16 years of Israel's existence, Palestinians living in its borders were placed under military rule. The state used extraordinary emergency powers to confiscate property and close entire villages as military zones, confining Palestinians to dozens of enclaves. They were tried in military courts and required permits to leave their cordoned-off areas. They banned protests and political parties. You know, like the West Bank today. According to Haaretz, Israel lifted its military rule over the state's Arab community in 1966 only after ascertaining that its members could not return to the villages they had fled or been expelled from. By the time military rule was lifted, Israel had completed its initiative of destroying Palestinian homes and making them uninhabitable. The damage was done. This bears similarities to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which some Americans believe was the end of systemic racial discrimination in the United States.
At what point did we stop being racist? Was when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, or when?
Yeah, I would say after the Civil Rights Act.
So the day of?
The day that everyone was given... No, I mean, systemically, yeah.
Although, of course, by the mid-1960s, following decades of discriminatory practices such as the Federal Housing Administration's whites-only requirement, the damage was already done. The United States was already largely segregated by neighborhoods of predominantly white single-family homes in suburbs and multifamily complexes in neighborhoods deliberately zoned by race. The same way that the segregation of American neighborhoods is visible to the present, the facts on the ground in Israel are quite a staggering dose of reality. Today, Arabs control just 3% of state land in Israel, despite making 20% of the population. The 90% of Palestinians who live in these areas experience higher rates of poverty, lower levels of labor force participation, educational attainment, and health. 50% of the Arab population live below the poverty line. Further, only 2% of industrial zones in Israel, which generate a significant tax income, are located in these Palestinian areas. The 10% of remaining Palestinians live in so-called mixed cities, but even then, they are usually relegated to separate neighborhoods. But why don't they move? Unlike most industrialized countries, in Israel, the state controls 93% of the land, either directly or indirectly through quasi-national bodies such as the Jewish National Fund. In 2011, the Knesset passed the Communities Acceptance Law, which established admissions committees in Jewish communities to screen applicants based on their social suitability or their unsuitability to the community's social and cultural fabric. This vague wording enables discrimination, primarily against Arabs, but also against Mizrahi Jews, Ethiopian Israelis, or anyone whom residents of the privileged community fear will lower the value of their homes. The 2011 law stipulated that these admissions councils were limited to towns with 400 residents, though this rule was repeatedly broken. Regardless, in 2023, the law was expanded to towns with 1,000 residents. Today, admissions committees operate in 53 regional councils, which control 81% of state land in Israel. Arabs are, in practice, barred from leasing land in 80% of the land in the state of Israel. For more than 15 years, the residents of el-Haran have been waging a legal battle to save their village, which is slated for demolition. In 2017, Israeli forces attempted to evacuate el-Haran by force and began demolishing homes. Yaqub Abu al-Kiyan, a 47-year-old Arab-Israeli citizen, was shot and killed. The Israeli police allowed no medical assistance for 3 hours. Afterward, officers suppressed evidence of his innocence, and Benjamin Netanyahu accused him of being a terrorist, which he had to retract later on after a Shin Bet investigation cleared him of wrongdoing. After the incident, the plan to remove the villagers was paused, but resumed in 2022. The new village being built, which will take its place, will simply be called Hiran. Hiran's cooperative association bylaws state an individual may be approved by the admissions if they meet the following qualifications: a Jewish Israeli citizen or permanent resident of Israel who observes the Torah and commandments according to Orthodox Jewish values. A similar fate doubtless awaits the thousands of homes which are demolished in the south of Israel every year. Home demolitions do not just occur in the West Bank, but in Israel proper as well. Attempts to challenge these discriminatory laws and uphold Palestinian rights are met with further difficulties. In Israel, political parties are illegal if they deny the existence of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, under the 1992 Law on Political Parties. Under the 1958 Knesset Basic Law, any political candidate can be disqualified for negation of the existence of the State of Israel as the state of the Jewish people, negation of the democratic character of the state, or incitement to racism. In Israel, BDS is out of the question. Though not a criminal offense to call for boycott, you are legally open to civil suit or sanctions under the 2011 boycott law. That same year, the Knesset approved Fundamentals of Finance Amendment No. 40, which has been called the Nakba Law. Under this law, the state can withhold funding for government institutions that commemorate the Nakba. Further limitations on free speech can be found in the Knesset's Rules of Procedures, which state that the Presidium shall not approve a bill that, in its opinion, denies the existence of the State of Israel as the state of the Jewish people, or is racist in its essence. These provisions prevent Palestinian lawmakers from challenging laws that codify Jewish-Israeli domination over the Palestinian minority, let alone the suppression of free speech and expression. Further barriers for political representation have also been put into place. In 2014, the Knesset raised the electoral threshold, meaning the percentage of votes needed for parliamentary representation, from 2% to 3.25%. This spurred a condemnation from the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, saying the move would considerably weaken the right to political participation of non-Jewish minorities. Palestinians' right to political participation, according to Jerusalem-based human rights group B'Tselem, is under constant attack. In 2015, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sparked backlash for filming himself complaining about Arab voter turnout, saying that they were voting in droves. In a disturbing development, During the 2019 elections, Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party provided activists with some 1,200 cameras only in Arab communities. Jamel Baransi, deputy mayor of Reina, an Arab town in northern Israel, complained, "We noticed that each of these representatives had a camera on them, on their bodies, a move he believed was designed to intimidate voters." After the election, the PR firm behind the operation boasted on Facebook, "Thanks to the fact that our observers were placed in every Arab polling station, the percentage of voter turnout dropped to under 50%, the lowest seen in recent years." The firm's head, Sagi Kaiser, had previously said, "Arabs are sitting alone in the polling station. We don't trust them. We let them vote in our country even though it's our country. They should at least vote truthfully." Palestinian-Israeli citizens' political history has also been fraught with political violence. Especially during the Second Intifada, the violent crackdown by Israeli forces was not limited to the occupied territories. In fact, 13 Palestinians were killed in Israel proper and over 1,000 arrested. Disparities in justice also prevail, with Palestinians typically being placed in pretrial detention while Israeli Jews get bail. Desmond Tutu, the South African bishop, whose anti-apartheid activism earned him a Nobel Prize, would write in 2014, "I know firsthand that Israel has created an apartheid reality within its borders and through its occupation. The parallels to my own beloved South Africa are painfully stark indeed." In 2022, Michael Link, then Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian Territories, concluded in a report that Israel was practicing apartheid. In its list of inhuman and inhumane acts were the citizenship law, which restricts the ability of Palestinians from Israel to marry individuals from the West Bank or Gaza. This does not apply to Israeli Jews. It also lists torture. Methods of torture include sleep deprivation, beating and slapping, humiliation, unhygienic conditions, and extended shackling and contorted positions, citing a report from the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, who, in a 2022 report to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, listed several prisons inside Israel which practice grueling torture. Amnesty International's report on apartheid in Israel had examined specifically the inhumane acts of forcible transfer, administrative detention and torture, unlawful killings and serious injuries, and the denial of basic freedoms committed against the Palestinian population in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Human Rights Watch's own report on Israeli apartheid stated, "Separately from the inhumane acts carried out in the occupied Palestinian territories, the Israeli government has carried out abuses against Palestinians within Israel, including refusing to allow Palestinians access to the land that was confiscated from them, and not permitting the more than 700,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled in 1948 and their descendants to return to Israel." Indeed, not only can Palestinian refugees living in, say, Lebanon not move to Israel or Palestine, they're barred from entry. They can't even visit Israel, the West Bank, or Gaza. Human Rights Watch also includes in their list restricting legal residency in ways that block many Palestinian spouses and families from living together in Israel. Indeed, since 2002, Israel has prohibited Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza from gaining residency in Israel through marriage. As a result of this policy, tens of thousands of families have been unable to live together. This is profoundly discriminatory. Ostensibly in place for security reasons, but when the law was enacted in 2003, then Interior Minister Avraham Poraz explained, "A decision was reached at the time that for now, family unification would cease, as it was felt that it would be exploited to achieve a creeping right of return. That is, tens of thousands of Palestinian Arabs are coming into the State of Israel." B'Tselem, in its list of methods in which Israel advances Jewish supremacy, includes immigration, noting that while any Jew in the world and his or her children, grandchildren, and spouses are entitled to immigrate to Israel at any time and receive Israeli citizenship, Palestinians living in other countries cannot immigrate to the area between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, even if they, their parents, or their grandparents were born and lived there. They also listed taking over land for Jews while crowding Palestinians in enclaves, saying Israel practices a policy of Judaizing the area, based on the mindset that land as a resource meant almost exclusively to benefit the Jewish public. Indeed, current Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich even used this term openly. Israel has used this land to build hundreds of communities for Jewish citizens, yet not a single one for Palestinian citizens, with the exception of the Bedouins in the south, who are having their current houses bulldozed to transfer them to new townships. B'Tselem concluded in their report on Israeli apartheid that Israel demographically engineers the space through laws and orders that allow any Jew in the world or their relatives to obtain Israeli citizenship, but almost completely denies Palestinians this possibility. A regime that uses laws, practices, and organized violence to cement the supremacy of one group over another is an apartheid regime. Keep in mind, of course, the Palestinians who live in Israel proper have it best. The situation becomes worse in terms of quality of life and human rights in the following order: East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and without any doubt, Gaza. The very existence of these separate legal regimes is one of the main tools through which Israel fragments Palestinians and enforces its system of oppression and domination. As a 2017 UN report on Israeli apartheid described it, the different legal rights afforded to different sectors serve to enfeeble opposition to it and to veil its very existence, and lie at the heart of the apartheid regime. The same report refers to Palestinians in Israel as Domain 1, which serves to sustain the myth that one portion of the Palestinian population enjoy the full benefits of democracy. If the Palestinians who live in Israel themselves are relegated to second-class citizenship and abused and persecuted against, one can only imagine just how dire and desperate the situation is for all the other domains, the West Bank and Gaza. It may feel convenient to omit the occupied territories, or perhaps it's implied that they're not Israel's responsibility. Even though Israel's Supreme Court has itself ruled that the West Bank is indeed held by the State of Israel in belligerent occupation. The long arm of the state in the area is the military commander. It's more popular to say that Gaza is somehow free from Israeli control, even though it enforces what a UN report described as a medieval military blockade, controlling imports and exports, export taxes, the territorial waters and airspace, and has blocked the building of an airport and seaport. They control electricity lines, the underwater cable that phone calls are placed on, the network that provides internet, and the frequencies assigned to Palestinian cell phone companies. There's a reason Human Rights Watch, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations, and Israel's leading expert on international law, Professor Yoram Dinstein of Tel Aviv University, have all concluded that Gaza is occupied by Israel and is therefore responsible for its population. It has failed considerably at maintaining their well-being. Michael Link, Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian Territories, reported in 2022, Gaza had undergone a multi-decade process of de-development and de-industrialization, resulting in a 45% unemployment rate and 60% poverty rate, with 80% of the population dependent on some form of international assistance. As B'Tselem concludes, Israel has continued to control nearly every aspect of life in Gaza from outside. Despite this, outside of Israel's border, in all the land that Israel controls, not a single Palestinian can vote in Israeli elections. They have no political rights to speak of. In the West Bank, an Israeli Jew, or in fact a Jew from anywhere in the world, can live with full citizenship and benefits, while a Palestinian doesn't have citizenship. Israeli Jews go to civil court, while Palestinians go to military court, with an over 99% chance of being convicted. Hundreds are held without any charges at all, and can be held indefinitely without any trial whatsoever. Their political and legal rights differ by their race. It is overtly, indisputably, and unambiguously unequal. Palestinian political parties and demonstrations are illegal. Palestinians in the West Bank are governed by more than 1,800 military orders pertaining to taxation, transportation, land planning and zoning, natural resources, including water. Israel controls all the water going into the occupied territories. Here lies a level of profound cruelty which may be unique in the modern world. In Gaza, before October 7th, 97% of the water was already unfit for human consumption. The equipment with which to treat their water was banned by the strict blockade of the Strip. Gaza was already suffering a water crisis. What was at the time lauded as an achievement for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the 1995 Oslo Agreement stipulated that 80% of water in the West Bank would be diverted for Israeli use, with only 20% for Palestinian use, despite the Israeli population numbering at over 100,000 and the Palestinian at well over 1 million. In a sickening provision, Oslo II provided Israelis with an unlimited water supply while restricting Palestinian supply to a predetermined amount. In reality, Palestinians extract less water than specified in the agreement. West Bank residents will attempt to supplement their water on their own, but military orders prevent them from building any new water installation without first obtaining a virtually impossible to obtain permit from the Israeli army. They are not allowed to drill wells, install pumps, or even deepen existing wells, and are denied access to the Jordan River and freshwater springs. Israel even controls the collection of rainwater in most of the West Bank, and the Israeli army often destroys rainwater harvesting cisterns owned by Palestinian communities. Palestinians in the West Bank are also routinely murdered by soldiers and settlers with impunity. Palestinians further have been relegated to 165 islands, disconnected from one another through arbitrary roadblocks which restrict their freedom of movement. Palestinians aren't allowed to build homes. They require permits that are virtually impossible to obtain, so they can't. And when Palestinians do build them, Israeli forces bulldoze them. These realities compelled UN Special Rapporteur Michael Link to imply that what's happening to the Palestinians doesn't only resemble the South African model, it's worse. This is apartheid. It does not have some of the same features as practiced in Southern Africa. In particular, much of what has been called petit apartheid is not present. On the other hand, there are pitiless features of the apartness rule by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory that were not practiced in Southern Africa, such as segregated highways, high walls and extensive checkpoints, a barricaded population, missile strikes and tank shelling of a civilian population, and the abandonment of the Palestinian social welfare to the international community. With the eyes of the international community wide open, Israel has imposed upon Palestine an apartheid reality in a post-apartheid world. Every day a person is born in Gaza into an open-air prison, in the West Bank without civil rights, in Israel with an inferior status by law, and in neighboring countries effectively condemned to lifelong refugee status, like their parents and grandparents before them, solely because they are Palestinian and not Jewish. I need your help. This channel relies on donations and patrons. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. And if you'd like to support my channel further, subscribe to my Patreon, where you'll have access to several exclusive videos unavailable on YouTube. You can also join my very active Discord server to view real-time news stories, videos, and updates on the channel. I also accept donations through PayPal and Cash App. Thank you so much to my patrons, and thank you for subscribing to my channel. Okay, take care. Love you. Bye.